Life rarely goes as planned, and sometimes the most unexpected turns lead to the deepest connections. Meet Lucas Reed, a hardworking auto shop supervisor whose life is forever changed by a discovery he never saw coming. A chance glance at a newspaper reveals a devastating loss, but it also uncovers a long-hidden truth: the existence of a little girl named Lila, who might be his daughter. As Lucas steps into a world of parenting, love, and second chances, he must navigate the joys and struggles of rebuilding a family while grappling with the shadows of the past. Along the way, he'll forge new bonds, confront old wounds, and discover the true meaning of family. But will Lucas be able to rise above the challenges and create a life filled with love and hope for Lila? Or will the weight of the past threaten to undo everything he holds dear? Stay with us to uncover this emotional journey, a story of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that define family. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your favorite moments, lessons, or questions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Now let's dive in. The autumn air carried the scent of gasoline and motor oil, clinging to Lucas Reed as he stepped into the garage at Carter's auto shop. It was nearing the end of another long shift, and his muscles ached from a day spent leaning over car hoods and maneuvering heavy tools. "Reed, can you double-check the invoice on the Corolla?" Carter, his boss, called out from across the shop. "Got it," Lucas replied, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice sounded sharper than he intended, but he was tired of the grind, of the endless string of cars and customers, of coming home to an empty house. The invoice took longer than expected, and by the time Lucas finally pulled into his driveway, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. His modest ranch-style home was quiet as ever, its white siding glowing faintly under the porch light he'd forgotten to turn off that morning. Lucas parked his truck and stepped out, the crisp evening air biting at his skin. He paused for a moment, looking at the overgrown bushes lining the walkway. Another thing I should have gotten to weeks ago, he thought. Inside, the house felt as empty as it always did. Lucas tossed his keys onto the counter and opened the fridge, pulling out a beer. He leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the small window above the sink. It had been 6 years since Emily walked out of his life. 6 years of trying to fill the void with work and routine. He told himself he was content, but the truth was harder to admit. He hadn't moved on. Lucas carried his beer into the living room and sank into the recliner by the window. The coffee table in front of him was cluttered with unopened mail and tools he hadn't bothered to put away. He reached for the newspaper buried under the mess, flipping through it absently. And then he saw it. The headline in the obituary section stopped him cold. Emily Sanders, 31, and Brandon Walker, 35, tragically killed in a car accident. His breath caught. For a moment, the words blurred on the page, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He stared at the accompanying photograph, a smiling woman with auburn hair and bright green eyes. It was her. Lucas read the obituary again, his hands trembling. Emily Sanders, the woman he had once thought he would spend his life with. The woman who had left him after discovering messages from an old girlfriend on his phone, a misunderstanding he hadn't been able to fix in time. His chest tightened as he read on. Emily and her husband, Brandon, had died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver. They were survived by their daughter, Lila Walker, and Emily's mother, Margaret Sanders. Lila. Lucas stared at the name, the weight of it pressing down on him. He hadn't known Emily had a child. Doing the math in his head, the timing hit him like a punch to the gut. Lila was 5. Lucas set the newspaper down, his mind spinning. Could she be his? Lucas spent the rest of the night pacing his living room, the words from the obituary repeating in his mind. Lila Walker. Was she Emily's child with Brandon? Or was there a chance she was his? The possibility clawed at him. Emily had never told him she was pregnant when they parted ways. But then again, they hadn't exactly left things on good terms. As the hours stretched on, Lucas replayed their last conversation over and over. Emily had been furious, accusing him of betraying her trust. He had tried to explain, but she hadn't listened. When she walked out that day, she had taken more than her belongings. She had taken a piece of him. By morning, Lucas had made up his mind. He needed answers. The small bungalow where Margaret Sanders lived hadn't changed much in the years since Lucas had last been there. The white paint was peeling in places, and the flower beds were overgrown, but it still had the same cozy charm he remembered. Lucas parked at the curb, his heart pounding as he stared at the house. He wasn't sure what he would say or how Margaret would react to seeing him after so long. Taking a deep breath, he climbed out of the truck and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. The sound of his knock echoed through the quiet neighborhood. After a moment, the door opened, and there she was. Margaret looked older than he remembered, her auburn hair now streaked with gray and her face lined with worry. But her eyes, Emily's eyes, were as sharp as ever. "Lucas," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "Mrs. Sanders," Lucas began, his throat dry. "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I read about Emily." Margaret's expression softened, and she stepped aside. "Come in," she said quietly. The house smelled faintly of lavender and lemon, a comforting scent Lucas remembered from years ago. He followed Margaret into the living room, his gaze immediately drawn to the photographs on the mantel. One picture in particular caught his eye, a young girl with auburn curls and wide brown eyes, clutching a stuffed bear. "That's Lila," Margaret said, noticing his stare. Before Lucas could respond, a small voice called out from down the hall. "Grandma?" A moment later, the girl from the photograph appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than Lucas had imagined, her curls bouncing as she walked. "This is Lila," Margaret said softly. Lila's wide eyes fixed on Lucas. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her expression wary but curious. "Hi," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas crouched down, his heart pounding. "Hi, Lila," he said, his voice gentle. "That's a nice bear you've got there. Does it have a name?" "Mr. Snuggles," Lila said, her grip tightening on the bear. Lucas smiled, feeling an inexplicable warmth spread through him. "He looks like a good friend." Lila nodded, then glanced at Margaret. "Can I watch my show now?" Margaret nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Lila disappeared down the hall, leaving Lucas and Margaret alone. Margaret motioned for Lucas to sit, and they settled into the worn furniture of the living room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lucas cleared his throat. "Is she mine?" Margaret sighed, her gaze drifting toward the hallway where Lila had gone. "Emily never said it outright," she admitted. "But I've always suspected. The timing, it lines up." Lucas felt a lump rise in his throat. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Emily was complicated," Margaret said softly. "She thought she was doing what was best for Lila and for you. She didn't want to disrupt your life." Lucas's hands tightened into fists. "Disrupt my life?" "She didn't even give me the choice." Margaret reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You're here now, Lucas. That's what matters." Lucas left Margaret's house that evening with a heavy heart and a clear purpose. If Lila was his daughter, he owed it to her and to Emily to be part of her life. But how could he make up for 6 years of absence? And how would Lila feel about a father she had never known? As he drove home, Lucas made a silent promise. He would do everything in his power to be the father Lila deserved. The days after Lucas's visit to Margaret's house felt like a haze. He went through the motions at work, fixing cars, overseeing repairs, answering Carter's questions, but his mind was elsewhere. Lila, the little girl with auburn curls and wide brown eyes, haunted his thoughts. Her cautious smile, the way she clutched Mr. Snuggles, and the faint resemblance she bore to Emily, it was all he could think about. By the third night, Lucas couldn't take it anymore. He sat at his kitchen table, the same newspaper that had started this whole journey spread out in front of him. Next to it lay a notepad filled with scribbled thoughts and questions. Could he step into Lila's life after so much time had passed? Would she accept him? And what if she didn't? Lucas picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. "Hello." Margaret's voice was soft, tinged with fatigue. "It's Lucas," he said. "I've been thinking about Lila. I want to be part of her life, but I don't know where to start." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "She's been through a lot," she said finally. "But I think it's time she knew the truth." A week later, Lucas found himself back at Margaret's house. This time, he had come prepared. He carried a small bag containing a stuffed bear, similar to the one Lila already had, and a children's book about families. When Margaret opened the door, Lucas noticed the weariness in her eyes. "She's in the backyard," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Lucas followed her through the house, his heart pounding. Lila was sitting on a blanket under the shade of a tree, surrounded by crayons and coloring books. She looked up as they approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "Hi, Lila," Lucas said, kneeling a few feet away. "I brought you something." He held out the stuffed bear, watching as Lila's eyes widened. "He's Mr. Snuggles' cousin," Lucas said with a smile. Lila hesitated, then reached out to take the bear. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "You get to name him," Lucas said. Lila considered this for a moment. "Mr. Fuzzy." Margaret chuckled from behind them. "That's a good name, sweetheart." Lila hugged the bear to her chest, her gaze flickering between Lucas and Margaret. "Why did you bring me a bear?" Lucas glanced at Margaret, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Lila," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I wanted to bring you something because I'm your daddy." Lila's brow furrowed. "But my daddy was Brandon." Lucas swallowed hard. "Brandon loved you very much, and he was a wonderful dad. But I'm your biological daddy. That means you were born from me and your mommy, Emily." Lila blinked, her small hands clutching Mr. Fuzzy tightly. "You're my real daddy." Lucas nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, sweetheart. And I'd like to spend more time with you, if that's okay." Lila was silent for a long moment. Then, she stood and walked over to him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you like pancakes?" she asked suddenly. Lucas blinked, surprised by the question. "You love pancakes?" A small smile tugged at Lila's lips. "Okay," she said simply. "We can have pancakes together." Lucas picked Lila up for their first official visit on a chilly Saturday morning. He had spent the entire week preparing, making sure his house was clean and the spare bedroom was set up just right. When they arrived, Lila's eyes lit up as she stepped inside. She took in the cozy living room, the smell of fresh coffee, and the soft hum of music playing from the kitchen. "Can I see my room?" she asked, clutching Mr. Fuzzy in one hand and Mr. Snuggles in the other. "Of course," Lucas said, leading her down the hall. Lila gasped when she saw the room. The lavender walls were adorned with butterfly decals, and the bed was made up with a comforter covered in colorful flowers. A small bookshelf held picture books, and a nightlight shaped like a moon sat on the bedside table. "It's all for you," Lucas said, watching her reaction. Lila turned to him, her eyes wide. "You did this for me?" Lucas nodded, his heart swelling. "I wanted you to have a space that's just yours." Lila climbed onto the bed, hugging her bears tightly. "I like it," she said softly. The next morning, Lucas woke early to make pancakes. He wanted everything to be perfect for Lila's first breakfast at his house. As he flipped the pancakes on the griddle, Lila appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "Morning, sweetheart," Lucas said with a smile. "You hungry?" Lila nodded, climbing onto one of the kitchen stools. As they ate, Lila's curiosity got the better of her. "What's your favorite color?" she asked between bites. "Blue," Lucas replied. "What about you?" "Pink," Lila said. She paused, then asked, "Did you know my mommy?" Lucas set his fork down, his smile fading slightly. "I did. Your mommy and I were together for a long time. She was very special to me." "Grandma says I look like her," Lila said. "You do," Lucas said, his voice soft. "You have her eyes." Lila smiled at that, her small face lighting up. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Lila began to settle into a rhythm. She visited every Saturday, spending the day playing games, watching movies, and helping Lucas in the kitchen. One afternoon, as they painted together in the backyard, Lila looked up and asked, "Do you think Mommy's proud of me?" Lucas's throat tightened, and he set his brush down. "I know she is," he said. "She loved you more than anything, Lila." Lila smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I wish I could tell her about you." Lucas reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "She knows, sweetheart, and I think she's happy we found each other." Monday morning began with the usual chaos of getting Lila ready for school. Lucas stood in the kitchen, tying Lila's shoelaces while she munched on a piece of toast. "Do you remember where your lunchbox is?" Lucas asked, glancing at the clock. Lila nodded, her mouth full. She held up her lunchbox triumphantly before shoving the rest of the toast into her mouth. At the school drop-off line, Lucas noticed how tightly Lila clutched her backpack as she stepped out of the truck. She hesitated, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous glance toward the playground. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Lucas asked. Lila nodded but didn't meet his eyes. That evening, as they ate dinner together, Lila finally spoke up. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think people can have more than one family?" Lucas set down his fork, sensing there was more to her question. "Of course," he said. "Families come in all shapes and sizes." "Why do you ask?" Lila pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate. "Some kids at school said I'm weird because I have you now and not Brandon." Lucas's chest tightened. He leaned forward, his expression gentle. "Lila, there's nothing weird about our family. Brandon loved you, and I love you. That just means you're extra lucky." Lila's eyes brightened slightly. "You really think so?" "I know so," Lucas said. A few days later, Lucas received a phone call from Lila's teacher, Ms. Alyssa Green. "Mr. Reed," she began, her tone kind but firm, "I wanted to talk to you about Lila. She's a wonderful student, but I've noticed she's been quieter than usual in class. I think she might be having a tough time adjusting." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She mentioned that some kids were teasing her about our family." "That makes sense," Ms. Green said. "It might help if she feels like she has a strong support system at home and school. If you're free, I'd love to meet with you to discuss some ideas." Lucas agreed, setting up a meeting for the next afternoon. At the school, Lucas felt slightly out of place as he walked down the brightly decorated hallways. When he reached Ms. Green's classroom, he knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Reed." Ms. Green greeted him warmly, motioning for him to come in. Lucas immediately noticed her calm presence. She had a kind smile, her curly brown hair pulled back neatly, and an air of reassurance that put him at ease. "Thank you for coming," she said as they sat down. "Thank you for calling," Lucas replied. "I want to make sure Lila feels supported." As they discussed strategies to help Lila, Lucas found himself relaxing. Ms. Green's insights were thoughtful and compassionate, and her genuine care for Lila was evident. "I think Lila's lucky to have you," Ms. Green said as the meeting wrapped up. "Not all parents are so involved." Lucas smiled, his gratitude evident. "I just want her to feel safe and loved." Over the following weeks, Lucas began seeing Ms. Green more often, whether during school pickups, parent meetings, or occasional community events. Their conversations became less formal, shifting from updates about Lila to more personal topics. One afternoon, after a school talent show where Lila proudly displayed her artwork, Ms. Green approached Lucas as he waited for Lila to collect her things. "Her painting was beautiful," she said. "You must be proud." "I am," Lucas said, his face lighting up. "She's got a creative streak a mile wide." "You're doing a great job with her," Ms. Green said, her tone genuine. Lucas hesitated, then replied, "I'm just trying to figure it out as I go." Parenting didn't exactly come with a manual. Ms. Green chuckled. "If it did, it'd probably be impossible to follow anyway." Their laughter felt easy, and for the first time in a long while, Lucas realized he was enjoying someone's company outside of his family circle. One Saturday morning, Lucas took Lila to the park. They had just finished their usual routine of swings and slides when Lila suddenly asked, "Daddy, why don't you have a wife?" Lucas nearly tripped over the question, surprised by her candor. "Where'd that come from?" Lila shrugged, swinging her legs as they walked. "Some kids at school said families have moms and dads. We have Mom Alyssa, but she's not really a mom, right?" Lucas knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Lila, families can look all kinds of ways. What matters is that we love each other. Alyssa cares about you a lot, even if she's not your mom. And I love you more than anything." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "I like Alyssa," she said. "She's nice." "Good," Lucas said, ruffling her hair. Lucas's growing friendship with Ms. Green eventually led to a coffee outing. It wasn't a date, not officially, but it felt significant nonetheless. They talked about their favorite books, movies, and the ups and downs of teaching and parenting. "You're really good with kids," Lucas said as they finished their coffee. Ms. Green smiled. I've had a lot of practice, but I think you're doing pretty great too, Lucas. The way she said his name made his heart skip a beat. Meanwhile, Margaret's health began to deteriorate. During one visit, Lucas noticed how frail she looked, her hands trembling as she poured tea for Lila. Grandma, are you okay? Lila asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Margaret forced a smile. I'm just a little tired, sweetheart. Later, after Lila went outside to play, Margaret turned to Lucas. I'm not sure how much longer I can do this, she admitted, her voice heavy with emotion. You don't have to worry about her, Lucas said, his voice firm. She's with me now. Margaret nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know, and I'm so grateful for that. As Lucas balanced parenting, work, and his growing bond with Ms. Green, he began to feel a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Lila's laughter filled the house more often, and her confidence at school steadily improved. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Lila announced, Ms. Green said, I'm going to be in the art show next month. That's amazing, sweetheart, Lucas said, beaming with pride. She said I'm her favorite artist, Lila added with a giggle. Lucas chuckled, glancing at Ms. Green. Well, I can't argue with that. One chilly evening, Lucas and Lila visited Margaret's home, bringing dinner as they often did on weekends. Lila was happily setting the table when Margaret motioned for Lucas to join her in the living room. Can we talk for a moment? She asked softly. Lucas sat beside her on the worn couch, sensing the weight in her voice. Lila's been thriving with you, Margaret began, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I can see how much she's grown, how happy she is. That's because of you, Margaret, Lucas said earnestly. You've done so much for her. Margaret smiled faintly, but her expression grew serious. I don't have much time left, Lucas. The doctor says my heart isn't what it used to be. I can feel it too. Each day is harder than the last. Lucas felt his throat tighten. Margaret, don't. Let me finish, she interrupted gently. I need to know you'll take care of her. Not just in the practical sense, but with everything. Lila's going to need someone strong, someone patient. And I know you're that person. Lucas placed his hand over hers, his voice steady but emotional. I promise you, Margaret, I'll do everything I can for her. She'll always know how much she's loved. Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. That same evening, after they returned home, Lucas found Lila sitting on her bed, brushing her stuffed bear's fur with a small comb. Grandma seemed tired today, Lila said without looking up. Lucas sat beside her, his heart heavy. She's been feeling a little under the weather, he said carefully. But she loves you so much, and she's so proud of you. Lila nodded, her hands stilling. I don't want her to go to heaven like Mommy did. Lucas pulled her into a hug, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. I know, sweetheart, but we're going to make every moment with her count. And even if she does go to heaven, she'll always be watching over you, just like Mommy. Lila sniffled, wiping her eyes on her sleeve. Do you think they'll be together? Lucas smiled softly. I think they'll be together, and they'll both be smiling down at you. The following weekend, Alyssa joined Lucas and Lila on a trip to the local farmer's market. Lila held Alyssa's hand as they wandered through the stalls, her excitement infectious as she pointed out flowers, fresh fruit, and handmade trinkets. Can we get these for Grandma? Lila asked, holding up a bouquet of pink roses. Alyssa crouched down beside her. Those are perfect, she said with a smile. Lucas watched the interaction from a few steps away, his heart swelling. He hadn't expected Alyssa to fit so seamlessly into their lives, but her presence felt like a gift. Later, as they sat at a picnic table eating freshly made pastries, Lila looked at Alyssa thoughtfully. Miss Alyssa, do you have kids? She asked. Alyssa shook her head. Not yet, she said, but I've always wanted to be a mom someday. Maybe you can practice with me, Lila said with a grin, earning a laugh from both Alyssa and Lucas. Despite the bright moments, Lucas faced new challenges as he adjusted to his role as Lila's full-time parent. One afternoon, he received a call from Lila's school about an argument she had with another student. She said, I'm not her real dad, Lila told Lucas later that evening, her eyes red from crying. Lucas knelt beside her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "What did you say to her?" "I told her she was wrong," Lila said fiercely. "Because you are my daddy." Lucas pulled her into a tight hug. "You're absolutely right, Lila. I'm your dad, and I always will be. Don't ever let anyone make you feel different." Lila nodded against his chest, her grip on him unyielding. As the weeks passed, Margaret's health continued to decline. Lila noticed the changes, often sitting quietly beside her grandmother during their visits. One evening, Margaret called Lucas into her bedroom after Lila had fallen asleep on the couch. "Lucas," she said, her voice faint but steady, "it's time for me to let go. But I'm at peace knowing Lila has you." Lucas swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "You've been like a second mother to me, Margaret. I'll never forget everything you've done." Margaret smiled weakly. "Just promise me you'll keep her safe and happy." "I promise," Lucas said, his voice breaking. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep a few days later. The loss was a heavy blow for both Lucas and Lila, but they leaned on each other for strength. During the small memorial service, Lila stood beside Lucas, clutching Mr. Snuggles and a bouquet of pink roses. "Goodbye, Grandma," she whispered, her tears falling freely. "I'll miss you so much." Lucas wrapped an arm around her, his own tears streaming down his face. "We'll keep her in our hearts forever," he said. In the months following Margaret's passing, Lucas focused on helping Lila adjust to life without her grandmother. Alyssa became an even bigger part of their lives, often stopping by to help with dinner or spend time with Lila. One evening, as Lucas and Alyssa sat on the porch after putting Lila to bed, he turned to her, his expression serious. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months," he said. Alyssa smiled softly. "You've done so much for Lila, Lucas. She's lucky to have you." Lucas hesitated, then said, "Would you consider being part of our lives for the long term? Not just as Lila's teacher, but as part of our family?" Alyssa's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for his hand. "I'd be honored." Spring had arrived, and the world seemed to bloom with life. For Lucas, the season felt symbolic of his own journey, a chance to start anew. It had been several months since Margaret's passing, and while the loss still lingered, life was finding its rhythm again. On a sunny Saturday, Lucas and Alyssa took Lila to the park. Lila darted ahead to the playground, her laughter echoing through the crisp air. Lucas and Alyssa strolled behind her, their hands brushing occasionally as they walked. "She's growing up so fast," Alyssa said, watching Lila climb the jungle gym. Lucas nodded. "Sometimes I feel like I blinked and missed half of it. I just want to make sure she knows she's loved." "She does," Alyssa said softly. "And she's thriving because of you." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. His heart pounded as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Alyssa," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "you've become such an important part of our lives. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Alyssa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Of course I will." As they embraced, Lila bounded over, her face bright with curiosity. "What's going on?" Lucas crouched down, pulling her into the hug. "Miss Alyssa just said she'd marry me," he said, his smile wide. Lila's eyes lit up. "Really? Does that mean she's going to be my stepmom?" "Yes, sweetheart," Alyssa said, wiping her tears. "But I hope you'll just think of me as part of our family." Lila grinned and threw her arms around both of them. "I already do." Planning the wedding became a family effort. Lila took her role as junior wedding planner very seriously, offering suggestions for everything from flower arrangements to the cake flavor. "Pink roses, just like Grandma loved," she insisted one afternoon as they sat at the kitchen table, poring over a bridal magazine. "That's a perfect idea," Alyssa agreed, smiling at her. Lucas watched the two of them, his heart full. He had spent so many years focused on what he had lost: Emily, his sense of stability, but now he felt like he had gained something even greater. Life was finally beginning to settle into a happy routine when an unexpected visitor arrived at Lucas's door one afternoon. Lucas opened the door to find a woman in her late 30s standing on the porch. Her auburn hair and sharp green eyes reminded him of Emily, and it took him a moment to place her. "Laura," he said, his voice laced with surprise. Emily's estranged sister nodded, offering a tentative smile. "It's been a long time, Lucas. What are you doing here?" Lucas asked, his tone cautious. Laura sighed, her gaze shifting to the floor. "I heard about Emily and Margaret, and I wanted to reach out. I know I wasn't around when I should have been, but I'd like to get to know Lila. She's my niece, and I'd like to share stories about Emily with her." Lucas felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, suspicion, and a flicker of understanding. "You've been absent for years," he said bluntly. "Why now?" "I don't have a good excuse," Laura admitted, "but I'm trying to make things right." Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to disrupt Lila's life, but he also knew how important it was for her to feel connected to her roots. "Let me talk to her first," he said finally. That evening, Lucas sat with Lila in the living room, her favorite stuffed bear perched on her lap. "Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you," Lucas began. "Your Aunt Laura wants to meet you. She's Mommy's sister." Lila's brow furrowed. "Mommy had a sister?" "Yes," Lucas said gently. "She hasn't been around much, but she'd like to tell you more about Mommy." Lila was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Will you be there too?" "Of course," Lucas said. When Laura came by the following weekend, the meeting was tentative but hopeful. Laura brought a photo album filled with pictures of Emily, including snapshots of her as a child. "That's Mommy?" Lila asked, pointing to a picture of Emily riding a bike with Laura. Laura nodded, her smile tinged with sadness. "She used to beat me in every race," she said. Lila giggled. She looked so happy. By the end of the visit, Lila had warmed up to Laura, asking her questions about Emily's favorite colors, foods, and hobbies. The wedding was a small but beautiful affair, held in the garden of a local venue. Pink roses adorned every table, their fragrance mingling with the fresh spring air. Lila was the star of the show, walking down the aisle as the flower girl with a basket of petals. She took her role seriously, her smile beaming as she scattered the petals carefully. When Alyssa appeared at the end of the aisle, Lucas felt his breath catch. Her dress was simple but elegant, and the look in her eyes as she walked toward him made his heart race. As they exchanged vows, Lucas's voice trembled with emotion. "You've brought so much love and light into our lives, Alyssa. I promise to love you and support you, now and always." "I promise the same," Alyssa replied, her eyes glistening. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Lila clapped loudly, her laughter ringing out as they kissed. "We're a family now," she declared, running up to hug them both. Life as a family of three settled into a comfortable rhythm. Alyssa moved into Lucas's house, and they worked together to create a warm, loving home for Lila. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Lila announced, "I'm going to paint a picture of us. All three of us together." "That sounds like a great idea," Alyssa said, her eyes meeting Lucas's with a smile. "You'll hang it in the living room, right?" Lila asked. "Absolutely," Lucas said. "It'll be the centerpiece." As the months turned into years, Lila continued to grow into a confident, compassionate young woman. Her bond with Lucas and Alyssa deepened, and their little family faced life's challenges together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila looked up at Lucas. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. I think Mommy and Grandma would be happy," she said softly. Lucas pulled her close, his heart full. "I think they'd be proud of all of us," he said. As Laura became a more regular presence in Lila's life, Lucas noticed subtle tensions beginning to form. Laura's efforts to connect with Lila were earnest, but there were moments when her unfamiliarity with Lila's routines and preferences caused friction. One afternoon, Laura visited unexpectedly, bringing a gift, a glittery dress that looked more suited for a pageant than a 7-year-old's casual wardrobe. "I thought Lila might like this," Laura said, holding up the dress. Lila hesitated, glancing at Lucas and then at Alyssa, who was folding laundry nearby. "It's really pretty, but I like comfy clothes better," she said politely. Laura's smile faltered. "Oh, I just thought you'd enjoy dressing up like your mommy used to." Lila shifted uncomfortably, clutching her stuffed bear. "Maybe for a special occasion," she offered. After Laura left, Lucas sat with Lila on the couch, sensing her unease. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lila nodded but didn't look up. "I like Aunt Laura, but she doesn't really know me." Lucas pulled her into a hug. "It's okay to feel that way. Relationships take time. Just be yourself, and she'll come to know how amazing you are." That evening, as Lucas and Alyssa cleaned up after dinner, Alyssa brought up the visit. "Laura seems like she's trying, but I can tell it's overwhelming for Lila," Alyssa said, stacking plates in the dishwasher. Lucas sighed, leaning against the counter. "I want Lila to have that connection to her mom's family, but I don't want her to feel pressured." "She's a thoughtful kid," Alyssa said gently. "But maybe it's worth setting some boundaries with Laura. It'll help Lila feel more comfortable." Lucas nodded, appreciating Alyssa's insight. "You're right. I'll talk to Laura." Lucas invited Laura over one evening, hoping to have an honest conversation. Lila was in her room, working on a painting, and Alyssa had gone out to give them privacy. "Thanks for coming," Lucas said as Laura sat on the couch. "Of course," Laura replied. "Is everything okay?" Lucas hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I really appreciate the effort you've made to be part of Lila's life. It means a lot to her and to me, but I think we need to take things slow." Laura frowned. "Slow? I'm just trying to make up for lost time." "I understand that," Lucas said gently. "But Lila's been through so much already. She needs time to adjust to having you in her life." Laura nodded reluctantly. "I didn't mean to overwhelm her. I just want her to know how much I care." "She knows," Lucas assured her. "And as long as we're all patient, I think things will work out." Lila's school held an art show in the spring, and one of her paintings, a vibrant depiction of a family sitting together under a tree, was chosen for display. When the evening of the show arrived, Lucas, Alyssa, and Laura accompanied Lila to the school gymnasium, where rows of artwork lined the walls. Lila beamed with pride as she led them to her painting. "This is us," she explained, pointing to the figures under the tree. "That's Daddy, Mom, Alyssa, me, and Grandma and Mommy in the sky." Lucas felt his throat tighten as he stared at the painting. The figures in the sky were rendered with soft, angelic details, their faces serene. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. Lila grinned. "Do you think Grandma and Mommy would like it?" "I know they would," Lucas said, pulling her into a hug. Not long after the art show, life took an unexpected turn when Lila came down with a high fever. Alyssa noticed her flushed cheeks one evening as they were reading bedtime stories. "You feel warm," Alyssa said, placing a hand on Lila's forehead. Lucas joined them, worry etched on his face. "Let's take her temperature." The thermometer confirmed their concerns. Lila had a fever of 103 degrees. Over the next few days, Lucas and Alyssa took turns caring for her, sitting by her bedside and making sure she stayed hydrated. When Lila's fever didn't break after 3 days, Lucas decided to take her to the hospital. The doctors reassured him that it was likely a severe virus, but they kept Lila overnight for observation. As Lucas sat by her hospital bed, watching her sleep, he felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. "She's going to be okay," Alyssa said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know," Lucas said, his voice low. "I just hate seeing her like this." By the next morning, Lila's fever had subsided, and her energy began to return. Lucas let out a sigh of relief as she asked for pancakes during breakfast. The scare with Lila's illness brought a renewed sense of gratitude for the life Lucas had built. He realized how deeply he depended on Alyssa's steady presence and how much he cherished Lila's resilience and joy. One evening, as they sat together watching a movie, Lucas looked at Alyssa and said, "I don't think I've ever thanked you properly for everything you've done for me and for Lila." Alyssa smiled, her eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me, Lucas. This is our family, and I love being part of it." Lila, who was snuggled between them, piped up, "Me too. We're the best family ever." Lucas laughed, pulling them both closer. "We really are." As Lucas, Alyssa, and Lila settled into their lives as a family, Lucas received an unexpected offer from his boss at Carter's Auto Shop, a promotion to general manager. The promotion would mean longer hours and more responsibilities, but it also came with a significant pay increase. When Lucas shared the news at dinner, Lila frowned. "Does that mean you'll be home less?" "Maybe a little," Lucas admitted. But it also means I can do more for us, like save for college and plan fun trips. Lila thought about this for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but you have to promise we'll still have pancakes Saturdays. Lucas smiled, ruffling her curls. Deal. Years passed, and the family grew stronger with every challenge they faced. Lila blossomed into a confident and compassionate young woman, her love for art and her family driving her ambitions. The day of Lila's high school graduation arrived on a warm summer morning. Lucas and Alyssa sat in the crowded auditorium, their hearts swelling with pride as Lila's name was called. Lila Reed, the announcer said. Lila stepped onto the stage, her auburn curls gleaming under the lights as she accepted her diploma. Lucas couldn't help but cheer loudly, earning a few amused glances from nearby parents. She's incredible, Alyssa whispered, her eyes shimmering with tears. She really is, Lucas replied, his voice thick with emotion. After the ceremony, Lila ran to them, her face glowing with excitement. We did it, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Lucas and Alyssa. No, Lucas corrected with a smile. You did it. We're just here to celebrate you. To celebrate Lila's graduation, Lucas planned a surprise family trip to the mountains, a place they had always talked about visiting but never had the chance to explore. As they hiked through scenic trails and shared stories around a campfire, Lila opened up about her dreams. I've been thinking about going to art school, she said one evening, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. You'd be amazing, Alyssa said. Your talent deserves to be shared with the world. Lucas nodded in agreement. We'll support you every step of the way. Lila smiled, her eyes glistening. Thanks, Daddy. And thank you, Mom Alyssa. I couldn't have done any of this without you. While Lila prepared for her next chapter, Alyssa received an unexpected opportunity at work, a chance to develop a statewide arts education program for underprivileged students. The offer meant more travel and longer hours, but Alyssa was thrilled by the chance to make a larger impact. When she shared the news with Lucas, he was nothing but supportive. You've worked so hard for this, he said. You deserve it. But what about you and Lila? Alyssa asked, her tone hesitant. We'll manage, Lucas said with a smile. We're a team, remember? Lila, overhearing their conversation, chimed in, I think it's awesome, Mom Alyssa. You're going to help so many kids. Alyssa hugged them both, grateful for their unwavering support. The day Lila left for art school was bittersweet. Lucas and Alyssa helped her pack her belongings into the car, sharing stories and laughter to keep the mood light. As they pulled up to the dormitory, Lila took a deep breath. It feels real now, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and nerves. It is real, Lucas said, wrapping her in a tight hug. And you're going to do amazing things. Alyssa placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. Remember, we're just a phone call away. Lila nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I love you both so much. We love you too, Lucas said. As they drove away, Lucas glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Lila grow smaller in the distance. The house is going to feel empty without her, he said softly. Alyssa reached for his hand. She'll always come back. With Lila away at college, Lucas and Alyssa found themselves adjusting to a quieter home. Lucas focused on his new role as general manager at Carter's Auto Shop, while Alyssa dove into her arts education program. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas turned to Alyssa. I've been thinking about starting a mentorship program at the shop, he said. There are so many young people out there who could use a chance to learn a trade. Alyssa smiled, her eyes lighting up. That's a wonderful idea, Lucas. You'd be great at it. Maybe, Lucas said, his tone thoughtful. I just want to give back, the way so many people have helped us. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lucas and Alyssa were surprised by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. They stepped outside to find Lila stepping out, a large canvas balanced in her arms. S'il please, Lila called, grinning. Lucas and Alyssa rushed to greet her, their excitement palpable. What's this? Lucas asked, gesturing to the canvas. It's for you, Lila said, carefully unwrapping the painting. The canvas depicted their family, standing together under a bright blue sky, their faces radiant with joy. Above them, Two ethereal figures, Emily and Margaret, watched over them, their expressions serene. "It's called Our Family," Lila explained, her voice soft. Lucas stared at the painting, his throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful." Years later, Lucas and Alyssa sat in the backyard of their home, watching their grandchildren play. Lila had become a successful artist and was now a mother herself, raising twins who had inherited her creativity and curiosity. "Life has a funny way of working out," Lucas said, his voice filled with contentment. Alyssa nodded, her smile warm. "It really does." As the children laughed and painted at a small table nearby, Lucas felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had brought him here to a life filled with love, resilience, and hope. "I think Margaret and Emily would be proud," Alyssa said softly. Lucas nodded, his heart full. "I think so too." The painting Lila had gifted them hung in the living room, a constant reminder of the love and connection that had carried them through the years. It symbolized more than just their family. It was a testament to the power of healing, forgiveness, and second chances. And as Lucas watched his family grow, he knew one thing for certain. Their story was only just beginning. 2 years into her art school journey, Lila called Lucas and Alyssa with thrilling news. One of her paintings had been selected for a gallery exhibition. "It's a small show, but they loved my family series," she said, her excitement palpable over the phone. "Will you come?" "Of course," Lucas replied without hesitation. "We wouldn't miss it for the world." On the evening of the exhibition, Lucas and Alyssa walked into the gallery, their hearts swelling with pride. The walls were lined with Lila's paintings, each one depicting moments of love and resilience from their family's journey. The centerpiece of the collection was a large painting titled Roots and Wings. It featured an intricate tree with deep roots, each branch representing a member of their family, including Emily and Margaret. The leaves were golden, catching the light as if they were glowing. As Lila introduced them to her professors and fellow artists, Lucas couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. "You've built something incredible," he said to her, his voice thick with emotion. Lila smiled, her eyes shimmering. "Because of you and Mom Alyssa, you gave me the roots to grow and the wings to fly." Not long after Lila's exhibition, Lucas and Alyssa faced a new challenge when Lucas's mentorship program at the auto shop hit a snag. One of his apprentices, a young man named Tyler, had been caught stealing tools from the shop. Lucas was devastated not just because of the theft, but because he had seen potential in Tyler. "I thought I was helping him turn his life around," Lucas admitted to Alyssa one evening. "But maybe I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to believe in him," Alyssa said gently. "But sometimes people need more time to change. Maybe this is part of his journey." The next day, Lucas confronted Tyler in his office. The young man looked ashamed, his eyes downcast as he admitted to taking the tools to pawn for cash. "I'm sorry," Tyler said. "I've just been struggling to pay rent." Lucas sighed, his disappointment evident. "Stealing isn't the answer, Tyler. But I'm not giving up on you. If you're willing to work hard and rebuild trust, I'll give you another chance." Tyler's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "I do," Lucas said. "But you have to prove yourself." While Lucas focused on his mentorship program, Alyssa's arts education initiative continued to flourish. She often traveled to schools across the state, bringing creative opportunities to underserved communities. One evening, as she and Lucas prepared dinner, she shared an idea that had been on her mind. "What if we expanded the program to include vocational arts?" she suggested. "Things like woodworking, mechanics, and even auto repair." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You want me to teach kids how to fix cars?" "Why not?" Alyssa said with a grin. "You're already mentoring at the shop. This could be a way to reach even more young people." Lucas considered this, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You might be onto something." A year later, Lila called with even more exciting news. She and her husband, Aaron, were expecting their first child. Lucas and Alyssa were overjoyed, immediately planning trips to visit Lila and help her prepare for the baby's arrival. When the day finally came, Lucas paced the hospital waiting room, his heart racing with anticipation. Alyssa sat beside him, her hand resting reassuringly on his knee. "She's going to be fine," Alyssa said. "I know. Lucas replied, though his nerves were evident. Hours later, Aaron appeared in the doorway, his face lit with joy. "It's a girl," he announced. Lucas and Alyssa followed him to the hospital room, where Lila sat cradling a tiny bundle. The baby had a full head of dark hair and bright, curious eyes. "Meet Margaret Emily," Lila said softly, her voice filled with love. Lucas felt tears streaming down his face as he gazed at his granddaughter. "She's perfect," he whispered. As Margaret Emily grew, Lucas found himself stepping into the role of a doting grandfather. He taught her how to fish, helped her build birdhouses in the backyard, and told her stories about her great-grandmother and namesake. One afternoon, as they sat together painting birdhouses, Margaret asked, "Grandpa, why do we make the houses so colorful?" Lucas smiled, his heart swelling. "Because everyone deserves a place that feels like home, even the birds." Margaret beamed, carefully adding a bright yellow sun to her design. Years later, the family gathered at Lucas and Alyssa's home for a reunion. Lila's twins were now teenagers, and Margaret Emily had grown into a spirited young girl with a talent for storytelling. As the sun set, the family sat around a bonfire, sharing memories and laughter. Lila stood up, holding a glass of lemonade. "To Dad and Mom Alyssa," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "You've shown us what love, resilience, and family really mean. None of us would be here without you." Lucas felt a lump rise in his throat as the family raised their glasses in a toast. He looked at Alyssa, her eyes shining in the firelight, and knew that their journey had been worth every challenge. In the quiet of the evening, Lucas sat on the porch, gazing at the painting Lila had created so many years ago. It hung proudly in the living room, a symbol of the love that had carried their family through joy and sorrow. Alyssa joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how lucky we are," Lucas said, his voice filled with gratitude. Alyssa smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's been a good life, hasn't it?" Lucas nodded, his heart full. "The best." As the stars twinkled above, Lucas knew that their story wasn't just about survival. It was about the beauty of second chances, the strength of love, and the legacy of a family built on hope. If you've enjoyed following this heartwarming journey of love, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. And remember to turn on notifications so you never miss our next heartfelt tale. Thank you for being part of this story. Your support means the world to us.